Welcome to the Productivity Show, a podcast where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tan. I'm the CEO and founder of AE, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm, of course, joined by my co-host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today, Brooks?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing very well. I just come back from like a wedding that I went to. I was the best man, so I had a great time roasting my best friend at the wedding, which is one of my favorite things to do. So I had a great time, and I definitely didn't stick to my rise ritual or my morning routine as much as I was in a foreign country. But that is today's topic, and hopefully we can help you kind of get back on track following a quote unquote morning routine or a rise ritual, as we like to say, because one of the things that we've learned over the years since starting AE since 2011 is that one of the most important things you can do to help your productivity is to create an easy to follow routine that you can follow after you wake up. So a lot of people like to call this a morning routine. We're actually not a big fan of that term because it insinuates that it only works in the morning, but it really works best whenever you wake up and after you wake up to follow this routine. So some of us might wake up at 7 a.m., but some of us might also wake up at 3 p.m. and maybe you have a night shift. So either way, regardless of what time you wake up, having what we call a rise ritual is really helpful to set yourself up for a productive day. And so the key is to have a routine of repeatable steps that you can follow to support your productivity when you start your day. And that is what today's episode is all about. And we're going to be covering how to find time for your rise ritual, even when you're busy, how to build your routine and which steps to include and what not to include. And also how to be consistent and roll with the punches when things fall apart, because life happens. What do you do when that happens? Well, we're going to help you with that here today. And next week, we have a very special guest. His name is Sean Wells, a famous person in the supplement industry, and we're going to be talking about biohacking. So he and I had a very interesting conversation about biohacking. So if you're into that, definitely check out next week's episode. And as always, we like to kick things off with our top 3 favorite resources. And Brooks, I'm going to steal this from you. I'm going to take this one. The first resource I want to recommend to people is called Camo. So it's CAMO. And what this does, it allows you to use your iPhone as a webcam on your Mac. So this is something we have actually been looking into as part of our podcast production. It's like, hey, can we actually have an extra iPhone as a webcam for some reason? And it turns out, yes, you can. So be sure to check out Camo. The next thing is called Shoolex. It's spelled SHOOLEX. So if you've ever bought shoes that were too big and you couldn't return them, Shoolex will come in handy. It's kind of like a shoe filler, and it makes it easier for you to fit into your shoes when they're too big. So I recently bought a pair of shoes that were too big. I couldn't return them because I bought them on sale. And so I thought, what's the solution to this? Well, some people on YouTube recommend to put toilet paper in the front of your shoe. I thought that's such a good idea, but Shoolex is actually a good replacement for that. So go check that out. And then the third resource is a book that I've been reading or rereading again, I should say. And that is The Magic of Thinking Big. So this is a classic by Daniel Schwartz. Highly recommend it. As the title kind of implies, how can you think bigger in life and how can you kind of overcome some of the beliefs that you have when it comes to possibilities and your life vision and so on. So highly recommend you check that out, The Magic of Thinking Big. So you can find links to everything that we share on the show notes by going to theproductivityshow.com/407. Brooks, let's kick it off, shall we?
All right. I like it when Tan does the top 3 resources because there's always like something from total left field that I've never even heard of. So a shoe filler. I did not know there was such a product. So that's awesome. All right. So let's get started talking about how to create your rise ritual. What are some things you can do to both create one, but also to be consistent with it? And step number 1 is to make time for your rise ritual. So notice we didn't say find time, we said make time. And Tan, all of us have suffered from this at some point. Have you ever been in this situation where you had your rise ritual, but maybe you didn't have time for it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Many years ago, I was kind of figuring out, okay, how do I create this routine, right? This morning routine or morning ritual or whatever you may call it, and actually use it and implement it. So I had an idea of what I wanted to do. And this is back when I was living in Los Angeles. And I felt like I was always in a rush. Like every time I woke up, I didn't have the time to do stuff for myself, and I had to be at work at 9 a.m. And if I woke up at, let's say, 7:45, for example, and I had a 35 to 40-minute commute, I just didn't have enough time to really go through a morning routine. It was literally just, hey, I need to brush my teeth, maybe find some quick food to eat, or even be able to eat in the car or whatever, right? And then listen to an audiobook as I was on my way. And that was kind of like, quote unquote, my routine, but it was really by force, not by design. And so I said, what do I need to do to actually follow through on this morning routine? And what I kind of realized was, I don't have the time in the morning to do it. I'm already lacking sleep anyway, because I go to bed pretty late. What if I go to bed a little earlier? And as simple as that sounds, that was actually the key for me to be able to have a routine in the morning and time for myself. So instead of waking up earlier, I said, let's go to bed earlier. So I could maybe sleep a little bit more or have the same amount of sleep, but maybe sleep a little better. And therefore have the time in the morning to actually do stuff that I wanted to do. So then I could actually like spend some time reading in the morning, right? Instead of doing it at the office during a break or something. And so once I kind of made that shift of, okay, let me go to bed a little early, it actually created the space for me to implement a morning routine. So that is one way I kind of like made time for what I wanted to do, and not just was hoping for a strategy that would magically, come true and say, oh, I hope that tomorrow is going to be different, when, you realize if you go to bed pretty late every single night, it's just never going to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of hopium involved with a lot of our morning routines or rise rituals. And really the biggest mistake that people can make when they try to do a morning routine is they try to jam this ideal routine that they have into it, just a schedule that's just completely unrealistic. Like really it's maybe it will work 1 out of 10 times, but more often than not, something is going to go wrong. Like you might think to yourself, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do yoga, I'm going to plan out my day, I'm going to read a chapter of a book, I'm going to call some friends to stay in touch, I'm going to meal plan. And that all sounds good, except I also need to get the kids up, I need to take them to school. Maybe I have like an early morning meeting with the London office that I booked, by the way. Maybe I need to call the senior care center to discuss my parents' medication. Like there's all this stuff that we're trying to jam a morning routine into a schedule or a situation that just isn't going to support it. And a lot of times something has to give. So you gave a great example for you, your bedtime had to give. You knew what you wanted to do, so you had to adjust things to make that happen. And so many things can come up in the way of your routine, like sleep, like you talked about, could be kids. I definitely identify with that. Could be a commute. If you have a long commute, it's going to be more difficult. Maybe you have early meetings, like my wife, for example. She's one of these executives that I think a lot of listeners will relate to, where she has to deal with people. We're on the Pacific time. She has to deal with people on the East Coast time. She has to deal with people on European time, but she also needs to deal with people in Asia time. So it's very difficult to have a consistent schedule when you're having to go all through these different time zones with different meetings. And then there's always surprises, right? Things will come up, unexpected things, or just stuff will come up. So what you need to do is have a look at what you have going on in the morning. More often than not, there'll always be surprises. There's nothing you can do about that. And we'll talk about some ways to deal with that in a bit. But look at what you have going on in the morning. And then when you plan to do your rise ritual, and see what you can adjust and move around if you can. And then you'll have a more accurate idea of what you have to work with. And then once you have that idea, then you can start figuring out what you're going to do when. Maybe you're going to have that realistic time duration that you can do. Maybe you can stack tasks, like do some things at the same time to free up some time. Maybe you can adjust your sleep pattern like you did, Tan. Maybe you can do some pre-work the night or weekend before. Maybe ideally you'd like to plan your day, say in the morning, but that's just not possible. So maybe it would work better to do it the night before. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do to try and have time in your morning, if you're a morning person, or later in the day, whenever your rise ritual is, to actually execute that on. So there's a bunch of different adjustments that you can do. Tam, when you were adjusting your sleep pattern, did you find that difficult? Was it pretty easy to do, or was there like a transition phase?
Yeah, I think most people can relate to this. Is when you try to go to bed earlier, you go to bed and then your eyes are just like wide open, right? A lot of times. Or if you're like that tired and you're just so drained, or you have like huge amount of sleep, that you can actually just fall asleep right away and just sleep a little earlier too. So uh, personally, I had the experience of just like being wide awake and figuring out like, okay, how do I actually fall asleep now? And then naturally, when you're alone with your thoughts, there's just a million things going through your head. And so that's when I kind of like uncovered too, like, oh, maybe it would be helpful to journal during this time so I can kind of get it out of my head. And that really helped a lot too. So yeah, nowadays what we would teach people is to go to bed 5 minutes earlier day by day, and then in about 2 weeks like you'll be able to sleep relatively easy at night, or an hour extra. So that's the strategy I would recommend today, unless you find yourself being able to fall asleep right away. So did you have to do anything as your kids were growing up? Because you have two teenagers now, so I'm sure
Yeah.
you've had a lot of experience of how that shifted over the years.
Yeah, well, definitely. And the thing you said about making gradual changes is such a great point too. The thing you said about making gradual changes is such a great point too, because it's not like you need to totally switch over. You can do a little bit at a time to get where you want to go. I know for me, like the time I have available in the morning, because mine is in the morning, and the realisticness, if that's a word, of what I can get done really has changed over the years based on the ages of my kids. When my kids were little, I was the one who made lunches for them. I was the one who took them to school and picked them up. So really, I had a limit on what I was able to do. And so my morning routine was much more compressed than it is now. Now they're teenagers. A lot of times I don't even see them in the morning until they're taking off to school, and I wave to them through my office window. So things are very, very different. So I would say if you do have young kids, give yourself some grace and just accept that you may not be able to do everything you want to do, at least at the beginning, but you can expand it over time. So that's what I would say.
I'm glad you said that, because I was about to ask you too, like, what would you tell people if they have little kids right now? And it sounds like just be okay with it, roll with the punches. It's not going to be forever. That's what it sounds like too. And just be okay that it's going to be imperfect, which is actually a tip that's going to show up later as well. So again, that was tip number one that we just talked about here, which is making sure that you make time for your rise ritual. And before we move on to tip number two here, I want to give a special shout out to our TPS Plus listeners and subscribers. So if you're new to us, we have an upgraded version of the podcast where we have episodes coming out a week earlier, and we also have them ad free as well. Plus, you get some extra bonus content when you are a subscriber. So if you're interested in that, or you want to support us in some shape or form, the best way to do that is actually to become a TPS Plus subscriber. So you can go to theproductivityshow.com/plus. Again, that is theproductivityshow.com/plus. So it's PLUS. And if you become an annual member, you actually get a really cool t-shirt that says one tweak a week, which is the idea of making gradual changes, which we just talked about. So I want to give a special shout out to everyone who has been a supporter of us so far. Thank you so much. Couldn't have done it without you. Made it all the way this far. And we're looking forward to welcoming new members as well. All right, let's move on to tip number two here. And that is to personalize your routine. So I'm sure Brooks, when you talk to clients, they read a lot of stuff about morning routines. They've tried stuff that I've published. They tried stuff that you've published. They've tried stuff from Tim Ferriss. They've tried stuff from all these other people that talk about morning routines. But how do you actually personalize your routine? What's been your experience?
Yeah, I feel very attacked by this tip because I am definitely like the target market for this. Because me personally, I tend to be a sucker for like reading about other people's routines, reading about other people's apps and workflows and stuff like that. And then I read it and I just think to myself, ooh, I should be doing that. Like this person who's success I admire or seems to have their act together, they're doing this. So maybe I should be doing that too. You read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin or something, and you're like, oh, I need to structure it this way. Then what I did is I realized eventually, it took a while, that, my life is just different than this author or this historical figure or this entrepreneur or whatever. So why would my rise ritual be the same as this other person when my situation is so different. And this is the important thing. And the reason we really want to stress about personalizing your routine is your rise routine should be something that supports your goals and helps you have a good day. And the key word there is you. You know, it's good to get inspiration from others. It's good to take little ideas, but just because someone else does something doesn't necessarily mean that you need to, or that it's even the right thing for you. So when you're building your rise ritual, what we recommend is instead of like copying someone else's routine or trying to do all this different stuff, think of it in terms of categories. Like if you can do something from different categories of activities in a rise ritual, and it doesn't mean you have to do all of them, but some of them, then I'd say you're on your way to having a good day, really. So from these categories, think of what could you do that would help you to have a good and productive day. And like the categories we kind of like think about when we're thinking about this stuff is movement. So it could be stretching, it could be exercising, could be going to the gym, you know, whatever that means to you. That's the first one, movement. Maybe a mind. So it could be reading, could be just mindfulness meditation, could be a quick gratitude exercise. It could be anything from that kind of category just to get your mind engaged. The next thing is planning of some sort. Could be just a quick visualization, could be a quick affirmation, could be journaling, could be full planning your day if that works for you. Just something that kind of like helps you know that it's time to start your day. And then, of course, there's food and drink. So it could be drinking water, which we generally recommend. Could be coffee and tea if you're into that type of thing. Could be breakfast if you're not a fasting type person. You know, whatever it is, some sort of, especially water at the very least, of just like getting your body ready to go. And then other things depend on your situation. Could be family stuff, like getting your kids up, prepping them for the day. Just could be like bringing your significant other a cup of coffee or something like that, or anything else really. You know the stuff that you want to do in the morning or at your rise time. So think, what of those could I build into my routine? And it could start really small. You don't have to do all of these things. We're definitely not saying that you need to do something from each category, but what are some things that you can kind of start with, and then you can kind of iterate over then. Tan, for you, when you are doing your rise ritual, do you kind of like hit all or some of these categories? And like, how long does your rise ritual generally take, would you say?
I would say anywhere between like 30 to 40 minutes or so. I think that's a good estimation. And do I do all of these? I think the one that I recently changed, maybe in the last 3 years or so, is probably the movement aspect. So I do a lot of stretching before I go to bed because I sit a lot and stand a lot. So I've learned that my hip flexors get pretty tight from visiting that guy that does the adjustments of my body once a month. Um, and what I've learned is that my hip flexors are always very tight. So I need to stretch them on a regular basis. And I always do that before I go to bed because it helps my kind of like relaxation, helps me lower my heart rate and just kind of get ready for bed. So I don't typically do it in the morning as much. I also used to exercise in the morning, and I kind of stopped doing that, where I now do it in the afternoon, uh, mostly because I learn about my own kind of like body and motivation and just like my own alertness in the afternoon typically goes down. Like I kind of have this afternoon lull. And it was later or earlier this year, kind of verified when I was using the Rise Signs app. It kind of showed me that too. Where it's just like, oh yeah, that's good. It kind of got affirmed that I have a afternoon lull. So it's best that I work out during this time. And so I used to work out in the morning, now do it in the afternoon because I feel like I can be more energetic that way. So that's why my morning routine or my Rise ritual is so short, I would say, because I don't do the exercise in the morning. Now, I get this question all the time, which is, should I not include exercise in the morning, or should I count that separately? You can definitely include exercise in the morning. Like some people love to run in the morning. Some people love to work out before they, kick off their day. And if that's you, like kudos to you, and continue to do that, right? I think what's most important is what makes you feel good. And that's the whole personalization aspect of this. I've learned that if I move the exercise part to the afternoon, I can kind of get the same benefits or results, but also I feel like I have more time to do deep work or focused work in the morning. which I would kind of replace that with the exercise time that I had in the morning, because I couldn't do the focus work in the afternoon, and that's kind of what I realized. So everything else like planning, a mindfulness thing, all that sort of stuff is always in there. And when I travel, I might shorten it even more. But generally, I would say, it took me about a few years of iteration. So don't feel like it has to be perfect right at the gate to kind of get the routine that suits you best.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned traveling, because that is tip number 3, not traveling, but to be okay with not being perfect. Stuff is always going to come up, like we said earlier. Traveling is a great example of when your morning routine can completely fall apart. For me personally, the other day, this is very timely for me because the other day I had to take my son to his driver's test. He failed it, unfortunately, but that's a totally different podcast episode. But the relevant part is we had to be there at 8:20 in the morning. And that was an example of a day where my morning routine just completely fell apart. Like, it's very difficult for me to do all the things I want to do, but also be half an hour away at 8:20 in the morning. But guess what? I ended up doing a compressed version of my morning ritual, my rise ritual. And what I did is there were certain things that I identify as being core that I always want to do, and I made sure to do those. And then the key is I looped back to the other things later in the day that are a little less key. So some things you might feel like it's okay to drop, but other things you might want to loop back towards the rest of the day. That's totally up to you. Because what we don't want to have happen is you create this great rise ritual. Maybe you do it for a little while, it's going okay, but then something comes up, your son has a driving test, you travel, whatever it happens to be. And then you miss a day, which happens either fully or partially, but then maybe you miss another day, and then boom, like goodbye morning routine, goodbye rise ritual. Like it's gone once you miss a couple days. We don't want that for you. Just because you can't do your rise ritual doesn't mean you should ditch everything, and doesn't mean that you should ditch it more than once. It's totally normal for things to get in the way, like you said, but you can always adjust it. So some things that you can do, some questions to ask yourself. And it's good to know this ahead of time so that when things come up, you know what to do. And so the first thing I ask myself always is, what are the non-negotiables? What are the things you really want to do every day? If something happens and you have to compress, what are those non-negotiables? Then what are the droppable things, or at least the first things to go? If things kind of start falling apart, what will you ditch altogether or shift to later? So for myself, for me, part of my morning routine is to read for 30 minutes. However, that is also the first thing that goes if my schedule gets a little wacky. And it doesn't mean I don't read for 30 minutes that day. It just means it might not be in the morning. It might be in the afternoon. It might be in the evening, whatever it is. But that I've identified as a droppable. And so what you want to do is ask yourself, is there like a short version of your rise ritual that you can kind of bust out when you need it? And then what is your plan for when things fall apart? The more you're kind of intentional about this stuff, the more likely it is that you're going to stick with it, even when those imperfect days happen. How about you, Tam? What do you do? What was your strategy when you were traveling for, well, the wedding specifically, but in general, when kind of like bumps come up, how do you handle that?
Yeah, typically when I travel, I kind of had to learn and come to accept that, so my morning is just not going to be perfect. It's just not going to be quite the same, right? So like in the morning, for example, at home, I might have a Theragun that I use to kind of like get myself ready in the day, but I don't have that when I travel. So I have to be okay with that. And just because I don't have it doesn't mean that it gives me an excuse to then skip the whole thing altogether. Like I used to be the type of person that if I typically go to the gym for 60 minutes and then for whatever reason, I only have 40 minutes, I would tell myself, oh, I don't have this full 60 minutes. So I'm going to skip my workout altogether. It wasn't the perfect condition. And so I'm going to skip it all the way through. And now that I think about it, I kind of laugh about it, because nowadays, if I follow, let's say, a 60-minute workout routine, and now I only have 40 minutes, I still will try to do most of it in 40 minutes, or I take a compressed version of it. So maybe instead of having like 3 sets of something, I might have 2 sets of something. And I kind of learned over time that it's actually okay to do that. And the idea here is something is better than nothing. I would rather have done the workouts rather than not having done it. Or if I had to reschedule it, oftentimes that creates more reason not to do something because now I have to find a new time and like maybe renegotiate other time commitments that I have. And so I would rather do a suboptimal workout and still do it, or do it maybe like in a shorter time frame. Maybe I don't get to go through everything, but I can still say, hey, I did it at least. Because the worst thing is if you skip it twice in a row, we typically just don't get back on the momentum train. So my golden rule is always, don't skip it twice in a row. Whatever you have to do, even if you have to do a suboptimal version of it, it's better than nothing.
So we have a page on the website which takes you through how to build a morning routine and be consistent with it and stuff like that. So we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. But other than going to check out that page, we always like these podcast episodes to end on an actionable basis. So to wrap up, Tan, what should people do other than check out that page? What should people do to take action and build their Rise ritual?
Yeah, what I would recommend you do today and moving forward is figure out a realistic time to do your Rise ritual and then plan a few steps to start with. So start with that today. So if you map it out today, then you can use it right away starting tomorrow, and you'll be off to the races. So pick the categories that we talked about, pick one thing, implement it right away. Even if you just make one tweak to how you do things now, that's still a big win. So go ahead and do that. And next week, we're going to be talking about Sean Wells about biohacking. So if you're interested in that, I think you're going to love next week's topic. If you're interested in like living longer, living healthier, like which supplements to take, what not to take, we dove into that very deeply, and I was really geeking out about it, and I love this. So I'm sure you're going to love it as well. So again, check it out next week. And if you want to find links to everything that we talked about today, you can find them in the show notes. Just go to theproductivityshow.com/407. So thanks again. Thank you, Brooks. And we'll see you next Productive Monday.